Good evening and welcome to the late edition of ViuTV News. I'm Joel Flynn in Hong Kong. Coming up on tonight's show, Carrie Lam arrives in Singapore on her first official visit abroad as Hong Kong's chief executive. We'll be taking a closer look at this historic trip. Lawmakers, meanwhile at home, get their first look at the highly controversial high-speed rail link, even as pan-Democrats boycott the tour. And Christine Choi is not the only one getting a grilling on her first day as Education Undersecretary, with a question about minimum wage leaving the new Labour Undersecretary Casper Tree stumped. Good evening. We begin with Carrie Lam's inaugural trip as the chief executive. She's in Singapore, the first visit by a Hong Kong leader to the Lion City in nearly a decade. But even though Lam is abroad, she is still being plagued by issues back home, most notably the cross-border high-speed rail line. We will get to that story in a moment, but first, our Singapore correspondent Fahima Mate has more on what the chief executive is planning to achieve on her trip.
Well, when you look at her schedule, nothing strikes us as unusual. She's been meeting government officials and visiting institutions like the Civil Service College and the GovTech Hive, Singapore's force behind smart nation and digital government. But analysts say the fact that she chose Singapore for her first foreign trip since her inauguration highlights the Republic's role as a strategic partner in the region. Hong Kong is eyeing stronger ties with ASEAN, the city's second largest trading partner. In an interview with the local media, the Hong Kong leader said she wants to emulate Singapore by having her government play a more active role. She added Hong Kong could learn from Singapore to promote the city and attract more foreign investors. Mrs. Lam is also seen to be making a concerted effort during her visit to reaffirm ties with the Republic. As we know, Hong Kong Customs Authority seized 9 military vehicles belonging to the Singapore government in November last year. The vehicles were being transported on a commercial ship back to Singapore after training exercises in Taiwan. They were detained when it made a port call in Hong Kong, but were returned to the Singapore government in January this year.
Well, the chief executive has been peppered with questions about the cross-border high-speed rail line after lawmakers were taken on a tour. 18 pro-establishment MPs were shown the West Kowloon terminus, including the designated mainland border area under the co-location immigration arrangement. But pan-Democrats boycotted the visit, saying they'd only attend if members of the government were there to answer their questions. Excuse me. Carrie Lam says she hears their concerns, but insists nothing will stand in the way of the co-location agreement.
I just don't see any alternative to doing this co-location in order to reap the huge economic and social benefits arising from our 26 kilometer of the Hong Kong section of the high-speed rail connecting to this massive high-speed train network in the mainland. So we will continue to explain and to address any concerns that some quarters may have about the co-location arrangement.
Now, just before leaving for Singapore, Lam had been forced to defend the new Education Undersecretary, whose appointment is strongly opposed by many in the sector. The chief executive says she doesn't see how appointing Christine Choi is declaring war against educators, an accusation that had been levelled against Choi. She's a Beijing loyalist and is seen as highly unpopular. She also lost her bid for the education seat in a landslide in last year's LegCo elections. Now, some lawmakers are also concerned that Choi will try to force the mainland's curriculum on Hong Kong schools. She, however, says she's all ears when it comes to feedback.
I know that it would be very challenging, but I still have the confidence that I can communicate, and we're looking forward to different opportunities to have constructive discussion with different stakeholders.
It's been a similar baptism of fire for new Undersecretary for Labour and Welfare. Take a listen to this. That's a fairly perplexed expression on the face of Casper Tree. Reporters were grilling him on how much minimum wage and welfare payments are. He didn't seem to know the answer to that question. Reporters even questioned him on whether the DAB member felt he was worth his $210,000 monthly salary. Chui admits he has much to learn in his new post. Labour chief Law Chi-kwang, a former Democratic Party member, however, also jumped in to say he didn't know the answers to some of those questions either. Moving overseas now, the Kremlin says that messages coming from the White House on planned sanctions on Russia are contradictory. That's after US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that he and President Donald Trump didn't believe the sanctions would be, quote, helpful to diplomacy between the two countries. A standoff of sorts has been in place since the US Congress voted through the sanctions, which has seen Trump remain publicly silent on the matter. His team, however, is being vocal about holding a firm stance on Moscow.
The relationship, as you know, in Russia continues to be under considerable stress. As I indicated in my first trip to Moscow and meetings at the Kremlin with President Putin, following those meetings, the relationship was at a historic low since the end of the Cold War, and it could get worse. And the question, I think, of the events of the last week or so is it getting worse, or can we maintain some level of stability in that relationship and continue to find ways to address areas of mutual interest and ways in which we can deal with our differences without those becoming open conflicts as well.
Ties to Russia are also plaguing President Trump's family. The White House is now confirming that Trump weighed in on a statement his son gave to the media about a meeting with a Russian lawyer. Donald Jr. initially said the meeting was about Russian adoption. He later admitted he was offered material on Hillary Clinton. The White House maintains that Trump did not dictate his son's response.
The statement that Don Jr. issued is true. There's no inaccuracy in the statement. The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had. This is all discussion, frankly, of no consequence. There was no follow-up. It was disclosed to the proper parties, which is how the New York Times found out about it to begin with. The Democrats want to continue to use this as a PR stunt and are doing everything they can to keep this story alive and in the papers every single day. The president, the American people, they voted America first, not Russia first, and that's the focus of our administration.
The FBI has a new chief nearly 3 months after Trump sacked the last director, James Comey. Christopher Wray has been confirmed as the head of the law enforcement agency following a majority vote at the US Senate. He's tasked with managing several controversial investigations, including whether Russia did attempt to influence the 2016 election. OK, coming up next, the latest from the world of business. Well, Apple is the only name on traders' lips at the moment. Hong Kong's share market is basking in the glow of the world's most valuable company, which posted strong quarterly earnings. The Hang Seng Index finishing the day today up almost 0.25%. No surprises really that tech shares were some of the best performers, particularly AAC Technologies, which soared more than 4.5%. It supplies components to Apple. Meanwhile, Asian share markets might be feeding off Apple's promising results, but when you look at the numbers, the tech giant continues to struggle in the world's biggest smartphone market. Revenue across Greater China fell almost 10%, losing out to domestic rivals for the 6th consecutive quarter. CEO Tim Cook is actually pointing the finger at Hong Kong, saying it dragged down the region because of poor sales. Speaking of Apple, its stance on VPNs in China is generating plenty of attention from online empires. A Chinese partner of Amazon is urging customers to stop using the programs, which let users skirt internet censorship. Sinet says it will shut down services for clients caught using unapproved VPNs. This is after Apple removed VPN services from its Chinese App Store amid a government crackdown to shore up its so-called Great Firewall. Now, US cable channel HBO says that hackers have stolen upcoming programming from their cable company. It's not released details of the damage, but according to Entertainment Weekly, the theft includes a script for an unaired episode of the hit show Game of Thrones. Jacob Greaves has more.
Spoiler alert, US cable channel HBO says it's been hacked and its programming has been targeted. The network is behind the hit fantasy show Game of Thrones. Entertainment Weekly claimed the theft includes the script of an unaired episode. But no need to go into a social media blackout just yet. That's not been confirmed by HBO. They declined to comment on any specific content stolen in the hack, but acknowledged that some of their programming had been taken. Entertainment Weekly report that hackers stole 1.5 terabytes of data. They also allege unbroadcast episodes of Ballers and Room 104 have been posted online, along with a script or treatment for next week's Game of Thrones episode. Reuters also received an email Sunday from a person claiming to have stolen data, including Game of Thrones. The hit show is in its 7th season and is set to wrap up next year. This is the latest plot twist for a show renowned for keeping its fans guessing.
OK, time for a break, but don't go away. When we come back, millions of bubbles invade Hong Kong, all in the name of art.